Breaking. It finally happened. The moment the Kremlin feared the most. After months of eerie silence, of Ukrainian forces seemingly vanishing into the snow, the storm has struck. And it's nothing like Russia has ever faced before. HIMARS, the weapon that changed the course of this war once before, has just turned the Russian front into a frozen nightmare. In just one night, Ukraine pulled off the most devastating coordinated strike of this winter, plunging more than 1.5 million Russians into total blackout. Imagine this. The snow-covered fields of Kursk, Belgorod, and the occupied Donbass, silent under the moonlight. Then, at exactly midnight, the silence breaks. Dozens of precision-guided missiles streak across the sky. A flash, then darkness. Power grids collapse, fuel depots ignite, and entire command posts vanish under fiery explosions. Satellite images from that night show massive shockwaves spreading across hundreds of kilometers, entire regions blinking out on the map like a dying heartbeat. What happened next sent shockwaves all the way to Moscow. Russian telegram channels exploded in panic. No electricity in Belgorod, entire districts offline. Communications dead, they wrote. Panic messages flooded social media mothers in Kursk, crying they couldn't reach their sons. Soldiers trapped without signals, hospitals running on emergency batteries. In one chilling message intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence, a Russian commander screamed, "We've lost contact with every brigade south of the river. They're gone. Everything's gone." This wasn't just another air raid. This was a precision blackout operation, something Ukraine had planned for months, waiting for the exact moment winter would freeze Russian logistics. Because in winter, there's nowhere to hide. Thermal cameras see everything. Fuel thickens, engines stall, and soldiers freeze in their trenches. And that's when Ukraine moved, striking every supply line that fed the Russian war machine. The result? Chaos. Total, uncontrollable chaos. The Russian Ministry of Defense didn't even know how to respond. Within hours, their official channels went silent. For the first time in months, no morning briefings, no propaganda videos, no victory claims, just silence. Then, out of nowhere, a brief statement. Temporary energy disruptions reported in several border regions. Temporary disruptions. The footage says otherwise. Entire cities like Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk gone dark for nearly 2 days. Factories offline. Ammunition storage depots exploding like fireworks, and convoys stranded on frozen highways, headlights flickering through the blackness like ghosts. And the irony, the Russians never saw it coming. Because this wasn't about brute force, it was about timing. Ukraine waited through the autumn mud, through endless nights of drone attacks and missile defenses, studying every Russian supply route. When temperatures dropped below zero, HIMARS systems upgraded and reprogrammed with new NATO intelligence data were unleashed. Every target had been marked for months. Every strike planned down to the second. One Ukrainian officer later described it simply. "We turned off their war." But this goes beyond the battlefield. For civilians in those regions, the blackout meant absolute terror. No light, no heat, no phone signal. Temperatures dropped below -10. In apartment blocks built during the Soviet era, people huddled around candles, wrapping their children in blankets, listening to the distant booms of explosions echoing through the night. And in Moscow, panic started to spread. TV presenters stumbled through censored scripts. Officials whispered about sabotage, cyber warfare, or even an inside betrayal. But they all knew this was Ukraine's doing. Footage from Ukrainian drones released later shows something haunting. Endless columns of Russian trucks frozen in place, headlights on, unmoving. The HIMARS didn't just hit the grid, they targeted fuel lines, bridges, and mobile command centers. Every time the Russians tried to reroute, another explosion lit up the horizon. What looked like a single night of strikes was, in reality, a calculated dismantling of Russia's winter infrastructure. And while all this unfolded, Ukrainian special units advanced quietly through the snow, cutting off communication towers, seizing electronic warfare systems, leaving Russian units blind and isolated. For the soldiers trapped on the front, it felt like the end of the world. Reports say entire battalions were left without command for over 36 hours. One soldier described it as, like the sky had disappeared, nothing worked, not even the stars. Meanwhile, Western analysts call this operation one of the most precise acts of hybrid warfare in modern history. The combination of HIMARS precision fire, NATO satellite coordination, and local sabotage teams achieved what no single airstrike could. It shut down an entire war machine without crossing the Russian capital's line. Experts compare it to a surgical decapitation, not of men, but of systems, of structure, of control. And yet, this was just the beginning, because as Ukraine's HIMARS rockets vanished back into the snow, Russia's entire command structure began to fracture. Angry messages started leaking from Moscow generals, accusing each other of criminal negligence. Power ministers called emergency meetings, and Putin himself, sources claim, demanded an immediate response, but no one knew who to call. The phones were dead. What happened that night will likely go down as one of the most humiliating failures in Russian military history. But this raises one burning question. If Ukraine can plunge 1.5 million Russians into darkness without crossing the border, what happens next? How far can Kyiv push before Moscow completely loses control? Stay tuned, because this was not just a strike, it was a warning. And in the next part, we'll uncover how Ukraine planned this frozen lightning strike for months, and why Russia never saw it coming. But before we go there, what do you think? Was this the moment Russia's war effort finally cracked, or is something even bigger coming next? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what's coming next will shake the Kremlin to its core. When the first HIMARS rockets fell, it looked like a miracle of precision, but this was no miracle. This was engineering, intelligence, and revenge, all rolled into one. What the world saw that night, the blinding explosions across Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk, was the result of a long, silent build-up. Ukraine had been waiting, studying, freezing the battlefield until the moment was perfect. Because in war, timing is everything, and winter is the deadliest weapon of all. Months before the blackout, Kyiv had gone quiet. No big offensives, no noisy press conferences, just a chilling calm. But behind that silence, NATO reconnaissance satellites were mapping every Russian logistics hub from Smolensk to Mariupol. The Americans called it Operation Eclipse. The goal was simple: don't attack the soldiers, turn off their lifelines. Power, fuel, ammunition, communication. Kill those, and the army dies standing. HIMARS, once the star of summer 2022, had evolved. Ukraine's engineers, working side by side with American technicians, had recoded guidance systems, pairing them with new thermal imaging data. They could now hit moving convoys through fog, or spot command vehicles hidden under camouflage nets at night. Russia had no idea the range and precision had doubled. The Kremlin still believed winter would favor them, their terrain, their endurance. But Ukraine had turned the season itself into a trap. Inside Ukrainian command centers, generals referred to this strategy as the freeze line. Instead of breaking through trenches, they would freeze the enemy literally and logistically. The plan was to wait until Russian fuel stocks were low, when ice had cut off rail resupply routes, when the soldiers' morale was brittle, and then strike all at once. And so they did. At exactly midnight, the first salvos targeted substations feeding electricity to Russian military grids. Within minutes, explosions rippled through Belgorod. The HIMARS didn't hit cities randomly, they hit power nodes linked directly to military installations. When the lights went out, it wasn't just civilian homes, it was radar systems, field hospitals, drone control centers, and communication towers. At the same time, Ukraine launched a second wave kamikaze drones, packed with thermite payloads, designed to ignite transformer oil. Those drones didn't aim to kill, they aimed to burn. And they did. Entire substations lit up the night sky, creating fiery halos visible from across the border. Satellite footage later revealed over 40 key nodes destroyed or disabled, a map of darkness stretching 200 kilometers deep into Russian territory. Then came the third phase, cyber warfare. While the HIMARS thundered from the ground, Ukrainian cyber units slipped into Russian grid control systems. They launched a synchronized digital strike, cutting off automated restarts. Engineers in Moscow scrambled to reboot power, but every time they did, another wave of drones slammed in. It was like watching a ghost fight, invisible, merciless, and unstoppable. Meanwhile, on the ground, Russian soldiers panicked. Without communication, they couldn't call for reinforcements. Some units abandoned their positions entirely, marching blind through snow-covered forests, guided only by the glow of distant fires. Intercepted communications revealed commanders screaming for updates, shouting over static, "We've lost the entire grid, even backup generators are down." And as the chaos deepened, Ukraine struck again, this time, the supply depots, using coordinates fed in real time by US and British reconnaissance drones. HIMARS launched another barrage, short, sharp, surgical. Fuel depots erupted into infernos. Ammunition silos detonated one after another, sending shockwaves across the countryside. It wasn't random destruction, it was surgical annihilation. A Ukrainian intelligence officer, speaking anonymously to Reuters, called it a night of payback. He said, "They bombed our power plants last winter. Now they feel what it's like to live in darkness. That single sentence summed up the operation's psychological impact. It wasn't just about military advantage, it was vengeance, perfectly executed under the cover of winter. The Kremlin's reaction was pure confusion. At first, officials claimed it was a technical failure. Then, a few hours later, they accused NATO of direct interference. But experts could tell, the precision was too fine, the coordination too seamless. This was Ukraine cold, calculated, and patient. Western analysts described the event as a hybrid masterpiece, a combination of kinetic firepower, cyber sabotage, and psychological warfare. The US Department of Defense, though officially silent, reportedly praised Ukraine's adaptive use of integrated strike systems. Translation? Ukraine had done what the Pentagon itself might do in a high-tech war. By morning, Russian morale had hit rock bottom. Soldiers were freezing in trenches without heat. Commanders couldn't issue orders. Civilians flooded Telegram with desperate posts. No heat, no light, no signal. Grocery stores shut down. Fuel pumps stopped working. And for the first time, state TV went off the air in some regions, literally black screens in the middle of propaganda broadcasts. The symbolism couldn't have been more perfect. Across Moscow, elites began to whisper. If they can do this to Belgorod, one oligarch reportedly said, they can do it here. Panic spread faster than truth. Airports raised security alerts. Police checkpoints appeared on major roads. The Kremlin rushed to assure the public that everything is under control, but even their words felt hollow because there was no power to broadcast them. And then came the most shocking twist. Ukrainian intelligence released intercepted footage showing Russian energy officials secretly calling for help from China. Desperate to restore grids, Moscow tried to import emergency transformers and cables through Belarus. But the logistics routes were frozen. Trains couldn't move. Trucks ran out of fuel. The entire system, from power to politics, had seized up. It was the first time in modern history that an army of over 1 million men was paralyzed, not by bombs on their bodies, but by silence in their circuits. Ukraine didn't just attack, it unplugged a nation. Every expert watching the aftermath agreed on one thing. This operation marked the evolution of warfare. It wasn't about tanks or trenches anymore. It was about data, timing, and precision. A war fought not with sheer force, but with intelligence sharper than any blade. And yet, the most chilling part was still to come. Because while Moscow tried to repair the blackout, something even worse began, a chain reaction they never expected. Without electricity, key fuel pipelines froze. Storage depots cracked under pressure. Thousands of tons of oil leaked into icy rivers. Environmental disaster, economic collapse, and strategic paralysis. The Kremlin could no longer hide the truth. The entire northern corridor of its war logistics had been dismantled. Trains were stuck, bases went dark, soldiers deserted in record numbers. For the first time, even Russian state media hinted at temporary setbacks. But that was only the visible part. Deep inside the Kremlin, panic was brewing. And according to insider leaks, Putin's top generals were already blaming each other for gross negligence and unpreparedness. Rumors spread that emergency meetings had turned into shouting matches, with the president slamming his fist and demanding a decisive response. But response to what? The enemy wasn't even visible. Ukraine had vanished back into the snow, leaving behind a trail of silence and destruction. And as the Kremlin searched for answers, one terrifying question began to echo through Moscow's halls of power, a question that might change everything. If Ukraine could turn off 1.5 million Russians in one night, what could they do next time? Because the next strike might not just target Belgorod or Kursk, it might reach the heart of Russia itself. And that's where the real panic began. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll uncover the aftershocks across Russia, the furious response from the Kremlin, and how NATO quietly prepared for the next phase of this war. The blackout was just the first act. What follows could be the collapse of Russia's war machine itself. Before we dive into that, what do you think? Was this a turning point or the beginning of total collapse? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because the next revelation will blow open everything the Kremlin tried to hide. The morning after the blackout looked like the dawn after a nuclear strike. Not because of radiation, but because of the silence. No power, no internet, no radio signals, just the faint crackle of frozen power lines dangling like broken nerves over a paralyzed landscape. From Belgorod to Bryansk, 1.5 million Russians woke to the same grim reality. Their country's war machine had gone dark. Inside the Kremlin, chaos reigned. Emergency lights flickered in underground bunkers. Generals barked conflicting orders. The defense ministry tried to regain control, but their internal systems were crippled. Secure lines dead. satellite uplinks jammed. What had been a centralized command now looked like a medieval fortress, isolated, blind, and scared. According to insiders, Putin himself was briefed in near darkness. His first words, reportedly, were not of anger but disbelief. How could this happen, without a single bomb hitting Moscow? The truth was simple. Ukraine had changed the rules of war. HIMARS wasn't just a missile launcher anymore. It was a symbol of precision and patience. It wasn't about hitting cities, it was about cutting veins. And now, those veins had frozen solid. Across Russia's western regions, panic erupted. Gas stations ran dry, rail lines were halted, hospitals begged for diesel to keep life support systems running. Thousands of soldiers deserted their posts, walking toward villages in search of food or heat. Local authorities tried to hide the scale of the disaster, but photos leaked anyway, endless lines of civilians carrying buckets, waiting for melted snow to boil. In Belgorod alone, over 700,000 people were left without water or heat. For the first time since the war began, Russian civilians felt what Ukraine had endured for nearly 2 years: cold, fear, and uncertainty. Then came the second shockwave, the economy. Stock markets in Moscow opened late, then crashed 12% within hours. The ruble fell to its lowest point since 2022. Energy exports froze literally as pipeline compressors shut down without electricity. European analysts reported severe disruptions in Russian oil shipments from the Baltic. Billions were lost overnight. But perhaps the most devastating blow came from within. Discontent spread through the ranks of the Russian elite like frostbite. Governors in Belgorod and Kursk publicly clashed with Moscow officials, blaming the Ministry of Defense for unacceptable negligence. Energy executives refused to take responsibility, claiming cyber interference beyond their control. In one leaked audio clip, a deputy energy minister shouted, "We told them the grid was vulnerable. We warned them for months." For ordinary Russians, those words were too late. Videos showed lines of people standing in the snow, clutching candles and phones with no signal. As distant explosions glowed on the horizon, fear turned to anger, and anger turned toward Moscow. NATO, meanwhile, was silent officially. But behind closed doors, European leaders knew exactly what had happened. In Brussels, intelligence briefings described the operation as a new doctrine of warfare: low visibility, high precision, maximum disruption. In Washington, Pentagon analysts called it a masterclass in strategic timing. And for the first time, Western intelligence agencies openly discussed what had long been whispered: Ukraine's ability to independently coordinate multi-domain warfare, cyber, kinetic, and psychological, without direct NATO control. That terrified the Kremlin more than the missiles themselves. Because if Ukraine could act like a NATO power, what did that mean for Russia's future in this war? Inside Moscow, the mood turned from denial to desperation. Putin called an emergency session with his Security Council. Sources say voices were raised, accusations flew. Some blamed sabotage by Western intelligence. Others accused the FSB of failing to detect Ukrainian infiltration teams near the border. One general was reportedly dismissed on the spot for gross failure to protect critical infrastructure. Another was placed under house arrest. The fractures inside the regime, once hidden behind patriotic slogans, were now wide open. And as the Kremlin struggled to restore order, the streets told a darker story. Across dozens of cities, protests broke out small at first, then spreading. Mothers of soldiers demanded answers. Shop owners begged for fuel. Videos posted online showed riot police arresting freezing civilians wrapped in blankets, shouting, "Where is our electricity? Where is our army?" For the first time in months, the fear barrier cracked. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the mood was grim but determined. Ukrainian commanders didn't celebrate. They watched. They listened. They monitored every Russian response, every attempt at repair. When Russian engineers tried to restore power in Belgorod, Ukrainian drones struck again, this time destroying the backup generators. It wasn't cruelty. It was calculation. Every move had a counter. Every fix had a follow-up strike. By the third day, Russian logistics along the northern corridor had collapsed. Trains carrying ammunition to the front were immobilized. Fuel convoys stalled. Drones that once terrorized Ukrainian cities were grounded, unable to recharge. For a brief, fleeting moment, the entire Russian war effort in the north was paralyzed not by defeat on the battlefield, but by silence. And then came the international response. The European Union announced an emergency session on energy warfare, while US defense officials discreetly praised Ukraine's strategic maturity. Poland and the Baltic states increased their air patrols, anticipating a desperate Russian retaliation. In London, British intelligence sources hinted that the winter blackout may be the moment Moscow realizes it cannot win this war through force. I was wont to take of the break follows in week unfraid. But not everyone was celebrating. China, Russia's supposed ally, issued a subtle warning calling for stability and restraint. Beijing's message was clear. Even they were losing patience with the chaos. For Moscow, that was a diplomatic earthquake. If China turned away, Russia's last lifeline would vanish, and Putin knew it. Inside his war council, panic turned to paranoia. Reports began to surface that he no longer trusted his generals. Meetings were held with a select inner circle only, in rooms swept for bugs and cell signals. The man who once claimed total control of Russia now ruled in shadows, afraid of the very system he built. And that's when the rumors began. Unconfirmed whispers from Kremlin insiders suggested that the blackout had exposed far more than grid vulnerabilities. It had revealed internal sabotage. Some claimed FSB officers had deliberately failed to stop Ukrainian hackers. Others whispered about oligarch-funded leaks of coordinates to Western intelligence. The word treason echoed through Moscow's corridors. In the days that followed, the Kremlin began purges. Commanders vanished, energy officials were detained, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Ukraine's strike had broken something deeper than power lines. It had broken the illusion of invincibility. Across Russian social media, one phrase began to trend before censors deleted it. The lights went out, and we saw the truth. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, President Zelensky appeared on television calm, composed, almost solemn. He didn't boast. He simply said, "We waited for winter. We waited for the moment when our enemy was weakest, and when the cold came, we reminded them who owns the night." His words became a rallying cry, echoing through the West. Analysts now call this the Winter Doctrine, Ukraine's new phase of warfare, built on patience, intelligence, and precision. It proved that modern wars aren't won by the biggest army, but by the one that can see in the dark. And yet, the biggest question remains: what happens next? Because if Ukraine can plunge millions into darkness without crossing the border, what will the next strike look like? Could Moscow itself be next? One Western diplomat warned quietly, "The next blackout might not just be lights, it might be control. Russia is trembling. The Kremlin is cornered. And the world is watching as winter turns from an enemy into Ukraine's greatest ally." So I'll leave you with this. Has Ukraine just rewritten the rules of war forever? Or has it triggered a desperate response that could push Russia towards something unthinkable? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Do you believe the Kremlin can recover from this? Or is this the moment history remembers as the beginning of the end for Putin's empire? If you want to stay ahead of what happens next, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because this story isn't over. The lights may be out in Russia, but the next move in this war will burn brighter than ever.